I personally have not opened an IDE since, again, the end of November. And that's not atypical because again, I'm a manager, but the engineers that I work with also have not. And the magnitude and the speed of that change is so much greater. The disruption that comes with it, is going to be real.
Hello, and welcome back to the StaffEng podcast. New season, new format. We're going to go a little bit more raw this season, just jump right in. I'm Alex. Last you heard from me, I worked at Stitch Fix. Now I work at Stripe. I'm going to let David introduce himself, and then we will get into it with our guest.
I'm DNR. Last you heard from me, I worked at Stripe. Now I no longer work at Stripe. It's the musical chairs around here, apparently. I've been doing an AI startup for the past year or so. Very excited today to have Will on the show with us and to kind of dig into the new world that we all find ourselves in.
Yeah, so Will, we'd love it if you just sort of give us a quick rundown, introduce yourself.
So I'm Will Maier. I work at Stripe. I haven't changed jobs at all, and it is an honor to be the raw guest and get this started weird, which feels fitting for the topic. I've been at Stripe for almost 5 years and lead growth engineering, which is not obviously or specifically a topic to dig on here, but does mean that I do a lot of work just broadly across Stripe. Basically, every surface we want to make it work well for users around the world who are just finding Stripe and getting started. So they need the product to work great, and we need to have a lot of high leverage. And so I kind of back into a lot of quality and technology, and then lately AI issues from there.
Awesome. I think maybe a great way to sort of start, this is a question that we asked ourselves when we started this, is when was your sort of aha moment of oh my goodness, this is going to change everything? You know what I mean?
The change everything was November 28th or whatever, right? Opus 4.5 splash. I feel like I've been through waves of that feeling in the last couple of years. I remember, doing workshops. We have an internal tool, just a basic chat thing. And even that, for standardizing incident report shapes and executive summaries, that was oh, whoa, this is already doing stuff that I'm old enough to remember that being, not a thing that's going to happen. Or always just a little bit ahead. But last November was really different qualitatively in terms of what felt feasible and then how fast things have moved since then, especially the jump in model quality followed by, harnesses getting better, us humans figuring out how to work with these workflows better.
Yeah. Do you remember the project or the product that you were working on or what you saw? What was the quality of the thing that was oh my goodness?
Yeah, like a lot of people, I sort of had a bookmark in my brain and from end of November, and then for us at Stripe, December is usually pretty busy until it stops being busy completely. And like many other folks, I was in the 2x usage thing on Claude, and so I spent the holiday doing something that I've wanted to do for a really long time, which is make a good Lua distribution that has a really rock solid standard lib for system programming. Have you used Cosmopolitan libc?
I've heard of it. I haven't had a chance to use it yet.
Yeah,
you might want to just give a quick rundown for what Cosmopolitan is.
So turn off the podcast and go check this out because it's that good. It's a pretty brilliant set of hacks, frankly, to make portable executables that run anywhere, everywhere, and that include a really big, really reasonably built clibc. And Lua is not a great language, but it's especially not a great standard lib. And with agent stuff, I knew I wanted something that I could program, that agents could program, that would be, distributable, reliable, and complete. And so I was like, okay, maybe no. And so I dived in. Just within a couple days, I had the libc patched up the way I needed it. I had the Lua distribution building. I don't frankly speak C, so that's a thing. And that's a multi-million line of code repo. It's a big chunky thing. And then from there, in early January, I was building an agent harness. Just the pace and layers got really weird. And I ended up writing a trip report just for myself, just stepping back and looking at what had happened at the end of 2025. And I had felt that sense, coming out of November. Like I couldn't escape it by the end of December.
Yeah, so I think that's amazing. I think there's a couple of things that like to sort of like call out there and make sure I'm getting this correct. So like Lua as a language, right, is kind of amazing because it ends up being an embedded language in a large number of different things. And so it's used quite broadly because of its ability to sort of like kind of fit into a place. And sort of, were you identifying sort of like an adoption issue where like because of its tooling, it wasn't easy to use or great to use for like end user quality? And so you were like, if I can make this one tweak, I'm making this language that is used very broadly in a lot of different places easier for all the people who have to write it.
A little bit, almost the opposite in a weird way. So like Justine uses Lua as the sort of scripting language in Red Bean, which is like yet another awesome weird thing built on top of Cosmo. Red Bean is like well, Green Bean and Red Bean are two like web server C programs, and she built in this like reprogrammable Lua bit, which is like a really reasonable common use of Lua. As a side effect of solving that problem, she just like fit Lua well into the Cosmopolitan ecosystem. And so I kind of like inverted that. And instead of using Lua to script like a C program, I just like jammed the rest of the standard lib into Lua and exposed it through the Lua C bridge, basically. And so you get like Lua, for better and for worse, with the whole breadth of a good libc that can run on any system without any other programmer needing any awareness of the system they're running on. And so like in the Claude Code web gvisor limited environment on my Mac, on, a variety of different DevBox type things fly where I run a lot of my code. It's all just the same thing. And it goes, as deep as you need to go with libc.
Awesome. So
before we go on, because I'm a little nerd sniped here, what are some examples of use cases?
So because of how solid and comprehensive Cosmopolitan is, like it has SQLite in it, it has, everything you need to do everything curl does in it. It's sort of like nuclear batteries included in Cosmopolitan. And so without really thinking much, you just expose that up through Lua, and then you get a single thing that can do all of the stuff you'd want to do for systems programming. And for working on again, like Claude Code in the web interface, like I just drop that in, it teaches Claude how to use it basically through the like help flags. And then I can solve any coding problem that I want there.
Sorry, you're using Cosmopolitan via Claude Code for Web, like Claude is running your CLI in the like Claude Code micro VM?
Yeah, so the Claude Code web is just like a gvisor sandbox situation that they spawn up. And my like motivating problem in December was like I wanted to write actual code there and like run my tests and like have it do normal things. And doing normal things in that context is hard because you have to like download, Python and all of its steps, or Node and all of its steps, etc. But like, again, because Justine's a genius, this is just like 1 5 meg thing. It's the same asset that I build in GitHub and run everywhere. And so I can drop it there, and then it exposes help flags and docs and stuff to Claude, sort of like a dynamic skill. And then Claude Web or Claude on my box or my own weird agent harness that, again, I built on top of all this, like they all just learn how to use it because it's a normal libc under the covers.
Very cool. Okay, I'm going to un-nerd snipe myself because I think we want to ask some sort of like higher level questions. But before we move on, where could listeners go to like what's like the one URL to rule them all for this stuff?
I mean, the one is Justine's because she's the one who did all the really, really cool stuff, and that's jart/cosmopolitan on GitHub. And then the hacks here are WILP, WHILP/cosmic, which is
amazing. Okay, we'll link that out for folks, and I will link that out for myself because I'm gonna hold off on reading that while we chat here.
But I think like some of the stuff that I think the quality of what you're talking about is like we are all engineers, and we kind of I think we always tell ourselves a little bit like, yeah, if I just have enough time, I can get to that thing. I can understand C if I just have enough time, right? I can. And so we have this huge list of things. And I think one of the things that you're kind of explaining is like the thing that knocks our socks off sometimes with this stuff is like, you can be like, oh, I'm just going to take that like notion I have and I'm going to throw it out there in the world and it's going to bring it together really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's both like ambitious, maybe. Like again, I know C kind of, but like not enough to do what I wanted to do here. And then it's totally work that I never would have taken on, right? And so like both like lowering the bar in terms of what I need to do to like sit down and make some valuable increment in the software, and then raising the bar in terms of like what I feel like I can go do. And as you mentioned at the beginning, like I'm a manager, so I don't do this every day, most days. That's been really empowering for me. And I mean, I was like sitting in the laundry, on my phone, having Claude Web do stuff to this system, hanging out with my kid, and like the fact that this was during the holidays and that I could be in the holidays and also doing like pretty massive hacks at the same time felt new in my career.
Yeah. That's a great like transition point. So like you are a manager, so you had this aha moment. So you just walked in on Monday and you probably did nothing at work, right? I'm
I mean,
curious. What did you do?
I've been as Alex knows, I've been flipping out basically every day this year, this calendar year, and the sense that it's getting probably a little annoying, but the sense I had that like, okay, actually, yes, this is different qualitatively. This is a change for better or for worse, and about which I'm still pretty ambivalent, but a big change and a really, 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 really quick change. That was a very like stark feeling coming out of the holiday break. And then like the way I thought about January is like I just want to work outside of Stripe for a couple of reasons to figure out like how weird this can get, and especially to quickly figure that out. Because my belief was that like first these the tools are not set, and like Cloud Code was releasing at least daily in this period. Everything is changing fast. Second, like it doesn't make sense to bake this stuff yet into how a big company does its work. Like we'll need to get there, but this is still like a discovery phase. And then third, like I don't know, so like I personally need to figure these things out so that I have a better mental model or better intuition. So for January, I was just like hacking a lot, and then trying incrementally to port sort of the basics back into the work we're doing at Stripe. So having Cloud Code, yeah, but then are we moving into skills? Are we sharing those skills, right, and making them available to each other? We now have an internal plugin marketplace, but like incrementally, sort of like figuring out the furthest thing that I could think of, and then coming back to like layer on the next thing and the next thing, and again doing that just because like everybody at Stripe is trying to figure these things out, not because self-serve growth or growth engineering has like a specific KPI on this. Like this is just about how the craft that we do is changing.
I'm curious. So, like, skills are an interesting sort of point of diffusion, right? Like, it takes a bunch of work. It's almost like a library or a package, right, that you could distribute back in the olden times. Like, what do you think has been some of the most impactful skill, like, categories that you've seen? Like, have you seen skills that your team has used most effectively?
We have a fun one. The best ones have been kind of like improvised internally. One of the ones I really like, because like you can think of these tools as like sort of intermediating the work you're doing or like your creative work, or like maybe reflecting, or in this case, an engineer came up with it as like criticizing or critiquing. But they made a incident report critic, right? So like take an incident report, tear it apart and identify all the ways in which, you could go deeper in understanding the contributing causes, in which you could make the timeline clearer, in which, you could identify remediations and pull it out. And it's like, just 100 lines or something. So super straightforward, but just pulling that out of I'm making the report loop and into like, hey, here's the opportunity to improve this report. That was really cool. And then especially really cool because that engineer just did it and then shared it. It wasn't like a big fancy thing. And for us at Stripe, we had a lot of goals last year about incorporating agentic stuff into our work, and like we made a lot of progress, but that required like coordinating, and a team would need on their roadmap like the primitives to support the agent thing. Like it was a big deal, and maybe it needed to be a big deal. Like in contrast, January felt like it's not a big deal. Everybody is experimenting with like basically markdown files that can do who knows what. And so both the simplicity and then the like improvised nature of this skill, and then the kind of pulling it out of doing the work for you and instead like helping the human who needs to understand the incident, right? Like the work of making the report is valuable. And if we instead like kind of criticize, critique, level up that work, then we get the benefit without losing the insight you get when you make the report.
You mentioned something interesting, just like everybody is now able to play with markdown files, and my experience since November 28th has been just sort of like a more playful experimentation with a lot less sort of like overhead to try new things. One of the conversations that we did a bit of a listening tour before starting this season of the show. I learned a term that I thought was pretty fun. Someone talked about AI vegans inside their organization. Basically, people who have some sort of aversion to adopting AI and you can there's a number of reasons why people would choose to do that. I guess it's worth taking a moment here to talk about sort of both sort of concretely what are sort of the objections that you've encountered, how do you think about those things, and then also just I don't know, this is a weird moment, philosophically, what does this mean for all of us, right? Block just laid off half their engineers, right? I think it's possible to sort of get down a rabbit hole with this stuff of oh my God, everything is changing, but everything is kind of changing, and it's weird to not acknowledge that at all either. How do you think about that, and how does that fit into sort of the organizational dynamics that you're working inside of?
I mean, the reason I've been flipping out is because both, I'm interested and excited, and it's I get to do this C thing, that I've always wanted to do. I feel like I have superpowers. That's great, and I'm terrified. This is so fast, and this is so big, and absolutely, there's a huge variety of people at Stripe and engineers, and my scope for thinking about this change is not just engineers, but zooming in on engineering for a sec, folks at various points in their careers, brand new, interns coming out of university, and this is their experience of the craft, just from here on. And then folks, who've been at Stripe for years, who've been in their career for years. Everybody is starting at a different point to encounter this change. Some of the most inspiring stuff I see is our interns, and that they are in deep. They are, when I look at the data, and I kind of spend a lot of time in this data, they are very curious and trying everything and engaging deeply with the technology, trying to figure out how to use it. And I've seen some cases where interns are using Claude's teach it to me mode, or the learning style that they have, to explain the code base back, or to build little walkthroughs of the code base. And it feels purely good, right? It's just a beautiful, help me learn, unalloyed good scenario. And then, absolutely, there are folks who tried, any of these tools on November 27th, and it sucked, and they're busy, they're trying to ship. They're maybe feeling deluged by slop, sloppy PRs from EMs, hypothetically, that are filling up the review queue, bugs that are landing that they need to clean up. There's a lot of stuff happening. For me, it feels a lot like what I remember the pre-cloud world to be. And I remember the pre-cloud world. The first part of my career, I spent putting machines into racks in data centers for years and years. And it was important to do, is the only way that we could do the compute that we needed. But soon, AWS started to be a thing. Soon, my personal job shifted from doing that to writing software to build cloud infrastructures. My job went away. It changed, and it changed over a couple of years. That felt fast. I personally have not opened an IDE since again the end of November, and that's not atypical because again I'm a manager, but the engineers that I work with also have not. And the magnitude and the speed of that change is so much greater. The disruption that comes with it, is going to be real. There were people who built all of Netflix's data centers and ran their DVD shipping operations, right? And then it was in the cloud. Individual people, I think, can make that leap, and that's why I feel so engaged with my teams in particular, to dig in and just figure it out and deal with it, and find a way to make the pieces that are changing work well for what we're supposed to do in our jobs. The ambivalence that I mentioned earlier is very, very deep, right? Feels like the volatility is very high. There's very big potential upswings and then very low potential downswings. And so the only thing that I feel then at the end of that is just urgency to get in there and figure it out.
That's funny. I also started my career working at an ISP and actually doing hardware stuff.
We turned out okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what's interesting that tectonic shift. I actually remember at ISP seeing Amazon for the very first time allow you to go and buy a computer, and I remember asking the people who ran the ISP. I said, "This seems like a problem for you," and they told me all the reasons why it wasn't, and I was like, "I'm not convinced." But I'm curious if this sort of resonates as like a mental model that we could use is like shift to the cloud, or I was talking about CI/CD. I think we've all been around long enough to see the adoption of CI/CD to happen in the industry. And when that first happened, I was working at Yahoo, and I remember seeing the very first sort of like continuous deployment stuff start to happen. And some people were like, "That can't ever happen here, right? That's impossible." But there was a mental shift that had to happen. We had to think about things in a different way. We had to say like, can we control deployment via feature flags? Can we do more testing at the edge? Can we do synthetics, right? We had to develop this whole language before you could start to see like, oh, actually that tackles this concern I have about this. That tackles this concern I have about this. And so like, do you feel like that's a helpful mental model for the adoption of AI, even though maybe AI is moving way faster than any of those things did?
I think it's way faster. Nobody says these words anymore, which I think is probably a great thing. But again, my focus is not just engineering. Growth sounds like growth hacking, right? It sounds like marketing. It's very cross-functional. It's very like everybody who's part of communicating with users working together. So in my mind, like, engineer teams, content writing teams, like those are sort of the sharp point where the change is like happening quickly, maybe happening early. Like zooming out, this is about people who work in knowledge, right? And like make things with their brains. And so, going way back, like I feel like this is the DevOps for work moment. This is like how we do all of the things changing kind of at the same time, right? Or like flowing out and becoming more evenly distributed across all these things. And again, like my experience of DevOps was like empowering and liberating because of, the role that I had, the companies that I worked at. And it was like a positive change that people were, making in their work, but it wasn't obviously a good one, right? It wasn't like foreordained that this would be, net best to build systems and make them work for people. There's a lot of risk implicit in that. Same with the cloud, like we're going to put everything in Virginia, like, and this is going to be okay. And no, it wasn't like always okay, right? And still isn't. And so the sense that like, there will be disasters as we adopt these tools. There will be really big problems that happen until we can figure out how to like, as people like operate in the system to make it work safely and make it work efficiently and well. And that feels, yeah, very, very, very true. And then again, it's like, do we make the incident report writer and then forget how to write reports and forget how to like learn about the incident? Or do we make the critic that kind of guides us, using cool like superintelligence or whatever, guides us to better and deeper understanding of the incident? I think there's at least two paths that we can take through this. And I would be excited if we can start to like develop more of like DevOps again had like culture as a pillar and had, yes, automation, but then also measurement. Like there's these plural pillars that we build into big, effective, positive changes that I don't think we've built yet into the tooling changes and the, wave sands, everything else changes that are happening now.
So maybe on that point, like digging a little bit deeper, one of the things I've noticed working in Stripe alongside you is just the total sheer volume of, you give a lot of cheerleader volume or energy, and I love it. You also make sure though that we have critical conversations, and I'm really curious, like how are you in the organization identifying those, and what brings you to like bring it to a public channel? And very, very pointedly, I'd love if you could chat a little bit about this thread that you started, I can't remember how long ago, where it was like, I think people might be feeling a little awkward about their use of AI. Can we talk about that and bring it into the front? I'd love if you started like maybe focused on that thread and then just more generally talk about how you find, what's your reasoning for bringing these conversations to a bigger audience?
Yeah, so I feel really lucky in that like my day job it's a full job, right? And like I think I feel grateful for the fact that like I'm supposed to get things done and work with people who need to get things done rather than just this, right? And like, again, in the past, there were like DevOps engineers and then there were teams that did DevOps. And I think the latter were more successful mostly insofar as they like were informing what they were doing with a way of doing it rather than like focusing on the it. There are people who need to focus on the it, right? And so there are teams at Stripe that build AI tooling and figure out how we do all this stuff, and I'm not them. And again, I feel lucky to not be them because this is really hard. But it means that my engagement is actually just like fueled by what I'm hearing from the engineers that I work with. Again, like the intern on my team, the engineer who made the critic, like these are people who are trying to build careers, trying to work, at Stripe and trying to figure out what all this is. And so I have my own experience of hacking on my phone in the laundry. And then I'm hearing also from engineers and interns and the folks that I work with about what's working and then, very much not working for them. And the sense that I had, this was a couple of weeks ago, which feels very far, that there was a little bit of like a shame, right? Like as folks were getting further faster, they were making mistakes, right? And like one of my engineers made a whole PR based on essentially like a hallucinated fact about a system that we don't own. And that's not uncommon. Like we did that as people 2 years ago, right? Because like things are real complicated in the guts at Stripe. So it's not like because AI, this person built this like PR of cards, but that played a role in the scenario, right? And so they felt a sense that like, crap, I should have found this, like I'm a bad engineer. I might look like a bad engineer because I let this slip through or I didn't catch it in time. So I was hearing stories like that from engineers who are trying to get out ahead, trying to figure out how these things work and sharing it with others. And I was also seeing a lot of people, maybe in like the vegan model, not engage or engage and bounce off, right? And kind of throw their hands up. This isn't worthwhile. So it felt important to me to try to like find some place to have a conversation about like, how does it feel actually as an engineer to be exploring this now? And I was really blown away by that thread because a bunch of folks, TLs, important people, and then just tons of engineers shared that feeling that like they tried something, they got their wrist slapped for it because we're still not sure about like the right security guardrails and policy guardrails, or they shipped something that was like total slap accidentally, and then they went in and cleaned it up. And again, that sense of like guilt or shame came through. Just in the few weeks since, I think that's subsided a little bit. Again, like the really rapid change also means like we're normalizing stuff that felt edgy and shameful, for better and for worse. I sent an email last year internally. The subject was like, it's good to feel bad. And I really believe that, right? Like when I feel bad about stuff, it's like, it's me reminding me that I want it to be better. And so some of those feelings I think are right, and we should respond to them and reflect on them. But already I think we're a little bit past that like edge of shame and into a little bit more of like mass or broad adoption, and then like real jank, like tons of weird things happening. And then a new set of bottlenecks I think that are emerging around like, how do we actually review the stuff that we're making? How do we actually verify, which is like kind of what we're trying to do under the covers of review? How do we actually like integrate and deliver it? Like these are a little bit more practical and less emotional bottlenecks, but still I think kind of the thing we got to jam ourselves through to get to the value.
It's a really interesting observation, like the sort of like psychology that's required to succeed with AI. Because on the one hand, it's just like the learner's mindset in general. You have to be okay making mistakes. I think that's sort of like a given for learning any new technology. But I also think like with AI in particular, you're effectively delegating to an entity that you don't know that well yet, right? And you sort of the act of learning requires you to delegate to this entity that you don't know that well yet. Anyone who's worked as a tech leader or manager understands that like delegation is a sort of has always been a fine balance in general. Forcing yourself to do it when you're sort of working blind is like really scary, but you have to get over that hump. The outputs. One of the things that I have found really interesting about working with LLMs really heavily over the past while is that it reminds me of people management in obviously not in every way, but when I first became a manager, I remember I distinctly remember this feeling of like trying to find the balance of like, I would have done a better job of that particular thing if I did it myself rather than letting someone else do it, rather than letting one of my reports do it. But I need to get out of that mindset because I'm no longer the person who's going to be doing all the work, and I want to try to scale my influence and help these people become, the best versions of what they can be and whatever. It's partly about allowing them to grow. It's partly about scaling my own impact in the organization, and it's partly about just sort of like this is how companies function. And I think one of the sort of like counterintuitive things about the introduction of sort of LLMs is that now everyone is a manager, right? And so everyone needs to learn this sort of like the rules about delegation, and everyone also needs to become okay with the fact that some of the things, some of the delegations aren't really going to work, and then you have to sort of fix that the same way that a manager would sort of like, oh, my line report screwed up. Let's back up. Let's try again. Let's coach them to whatever degree you can. Bring other people in. Lean in yourself. Whatever, right? And I think I think it's just weird. And as the models get better, I think that analogy becomes sort of like more and more accurate. And it also means that the organizations who are able to move the fastest with AI are the ones who have always had enough give within them for individual contributors to make mistakes.
Yeah, one of the things I've been struggling with, right, is like I'm not seeing enough mistakes at all. Like I'm sure my team hates it. The question I ask frequently in one-on-ones is like tell me about something you did that was wrong. Like tell me about the mistake. And I get some, and I see some, again across Stripe. And I mentioned, like the PR built on the hallucination, right? Like that's a good one, right? It's like that's okay. We can deal with that. These are good mistakes to make. I'm not seeing enough, right? And it makes me worry that either they're happening and folks are like, stressing and obscuring perhaps, or more likely that we're just not pushing hard enough. We're not close enough to the envelope to discover both like the valuable stuff and then also to make these mistakes while there's still time, while we can still change what we're doing to address them. And so I'm really intensely interested on the frontier in a company like Stripe. What is weird? What is janky? Where are the mistakes happening? And then how do we like funnel those back into, what we do as managers and teams, and then what we do on the like central tooling front in order to pave a path sort of around or past those mistakes.
I think doing something more deliberate, like we're doing lots of deliberate things, like we're doing demos and all that stuff, but I had a great conversation. I had the opportunity to lead a conversation just about AI, and I sort of took a more objective path where I just like pulled up and I said, who's using AI the most? I literally had like an internal report. And then I just sort of started at the top and I went down and I said, talk to me about like what you're doing. And it led to some of the most insightful conversations that we've had, because we had one engineer describe how they're using the tool to create PR comments on their behalf. And you could tell that there was a bunch of others who were like, I didn't know that we were doing that yet. And that led to some really amazing conversation around like, what is the legitimacy of that? How are we valuing that? How are we managing the quality of that? Which is exactly where the conversation needs to be. But I don't think it's getting there if we don't like more actively throw these things into the world and say, I did this weird thing. I did this weird thing. What do you all think?
I made a dashboard and sent it around just last week, right? If like, if you take everybody, again, not just engineers, but everybody at Stripe, and look at their token usage on a trailing 7-day basis, and then kind of chunk that up into groups arbitrarily, interesting groups. First, like that's the wrong thing to measure. I will say first and straight up, like that's not the point. It's not the goal. Like just using tokens is not what we're doing. But like it's hard to use that many tokens, at the upper chunks of this if you're just hitting tab. If you're in cursor and you're like tab, or if you're in a chat thing, right? Like those are both bound, by like your human, how fast you can move your finger. And there are people, at these like weird echelons past that point in a company like Stripe, and I'm sure, everywhere, that have figured out the next thing or something beyond that. And sometimes it's like they're just using a lot of tokens in a weird way. And other times, they've figured out a multi-agent or a continuous agent or whatever is after that. I don't know. Like some workflow that as a consequence consumes these tokens. And the coolest thing I heard from folks last week was like, I just had no idea that was possible. Like I didn't know not only you could consume that many tokens. And folks, because they could see then in context where they were and where other folks were, started to reach out and say like, yo, you're like number 3 on the whatever. What are you doing? And how do I incorporate that? So having that like context, that like situational awareness is really hard. And we should be really careful about, exclusively measuring the wrong thing. But sometimes measuring the wrong thing can give you some insight about the right thing, and especially can like distribute that insight so we can start to converge people on, higher value, higher leverage ways of working.
I had sort of a meta question. You mentioned that you started racking servers, but then sort of like worked your way back through software. I'm curious, like is there some existing set of priors or tools that you feel like help you navigate that journey in your life? And do you feel like it's the same set of tools that are helping you navigate AI?
Yeah, I have never taken a CS class, right? Like my background is not CSE. It is the history of science, which both meant that I was inevitably going to work at Stripe, where like there's an odd concentration of people that care about this. And also that, really for the last like 20 or almost 30 years, I guess, like just how people learn stuff and how that changes has been like the constant theme of, what I've studied and then what I've worked on. And so when it seemed like, the racking thing was not, not going to be the long term, like first I was like, dope, this sucks. And second, I was like, interesting, like this is a big change. What is the paradigm that is shifting here and like who's participating in it and how does that change accelerate? How do we actually like make this happen? So I joined a startup, right? And like that startup couldn't buy racks. Like even if we had wanted to, it was enabled by or predicated on the existence of a cloud provider, right? That we could spin up with like a credit card. And then, that phase extended for a while. I feel like we're in a similar shift. And I know we've done this before, right? Like I've never cracked open my binary to look at the assembly, right? But I know people did that, wrote it. I know, we did punch cards. I know, object-oriented programming wasn't a thing and then was a thing and, COBOL. And like the waves of changes in how we make computer stuff have always meant that, somebody's got a specialized skill that has a shelf life and that what's changing actually like increases the amount of work we need to do, right? Like there's not less software today because of object-oriented programming. There's almost hard to say with a straight face. Like I feel really, really clear that there's going to be a lot more software this year, right? On this timeline that we're in than in any alternative. And that's both like very exciting, again, as like somebody who's nominally responsible for producing software. But then like even when I imagine, everybody on my team doing pure high leverage, like next level AI stuff, there's still like 100x more software that's needed in a like bespoke, highly contextual way. Just in all the nooks and crannies at Stripe, let alone all of our users, let alone the whole world. Like we are so behind where people, I think, need computers to be. And again, if the lab stopped working today, we have years of work at Stripe just to catch up to the outputs.
Wouldn't it honestly kind of be a blessing?
Like I used to watch every Cloud Code release, right? I like read the change logs and like I'm tired. I'm just exhausted. And it's not that it doesn't matter, right? All these advancements are really important. It's just like, from where we were a little bit before November to where we are today, like we haven't figured it out yet. And I don't think they have figured it out yet to tell us, right? Nobody's going to come down from the mountain with like the best practices markdown file. Like we really need to figure this out in context in a company like Stripe, around the industry, just like we did, when things changed in the past. I still feel the change here is bigger and faster, right, than any that I've experienced. I've been through a couple. And that makes me, again, excited and also terrified.
What do you think are the right forums for people who want to be, we've used the example of like the transition to cloud or the transition to CI/CD, and, industry best practices emerge from those things, right? And there's obviously conversations happening on X and places like that about industry best practices for AI in the context of a tech organization. I'm curious if there's sort of like anything that jumps out at you or anything that you wish existed, any conversations that you wish were happening or conferences that you wish existed. Yeah, where do you land on that?
This is very much Back to the Future for me. Like, if you look on I'll say Twitter, like, my account's been dead for years. I went back to it at the beginning of COVID, right? Because like that was where I could learn quickly what was happening. And again, a lot of the speed of this change and like the super linearness of this change really reminds my muscle memory of that phase. And then like the DevOps and cloud world, right? And like I'm coming back. The fact that I'm coming back to Twitter X right now, I think is reminding me that, yeah, this is that kind of change. Bunch of people together trying to figure out what's what. The last time I also went to like a lot of conferences, obviously pre-COVID, was DevOps stuff. And I do think we need as an industry that kind of like integrating behavior where we just like sit down and like talk about what the stuff is. I wonder though, like, again, it would be hard to like plan the conference for this year given November, which was truly, basically weeks ago. And the pace is intimidating, in terms of like how just we as people are used to integrating that change. I think the reality is like it's a big world out there. Most of the world is not yet having to contend with the really weird frontier parts of this, but it feels very urgent to figure out, at least like in small groups, how we start to have those conversations, especially within companies, but across companies. I don't have the answer at all. I think the environment of like online stuff, should be an advantage. We should be able across the world to connect and like share things. And, I guess Discord now is probably cooler, but I really don't know. I hope somebody figures it out.
I think the general pattern that you're bringing up here is like lean into the signal. It might be high noise, but lean into the signal in moments of sort of like disorder or discovery, because that's going to be the rawest place for you to like quickly gather new facts and incorporate them into your daily life.
I personally, like, I do this as a manager, right? Like, I don't shield my teams. I try to like connect them. And that's just like my intuitive behavior at this point as a manager. Like, this is a moment of like massive disruption and creativity and, as you say, chaos and disorder, which sounds epic. And so, yeah, like I'm basically doubling down on that behavior and trying to connect other people to like scale it out. I don't think I never have recommended to my engineers to like go on Twitter and like follow Boris or whatever. Like, I don't think everybody needs to do that. I do think though that more people need to, and I think we need to get better at like distributing or circulating what we're finding in compelling ways. And there are folks inside Stripe who like have concise newsletters that basically at this point thousands of people read. It's a great opportunity for somebody to be the best at X, the best at whatever it is. And those opportunities now are like, just like the demand for software, I think are scaling really, really rapidly. So for individuals who are curious and who have that bandwidth, I think there's a big opportunity. And then for everybody, it's like just a question of practice, like everything else. Integrating into the day, getting dissatisfied at the tab thing, and responding to that dissatisfaction, right, with like some spike, some exploration, some bounded thing, and asking somebody else what they're doing, right, figuring out how to do it themselves. I mean, like, I think we're doing okay as a company, but like, I feel really worried that we need to be doing a lot better for our users, right? Because our users are small companies around the world and they don't have, massive production systems and like global financial blah, blah, blah. Like, they're just figuring out the right way to work right now. And when I read like the Strong DM Attractor repo, like whatever that is, or the harness engineering posts, like I think people are trying to like show what is emerging now in ways, again, that are like really challenging to integrate into multi-thousand person engineering orgs and stuff like that. And so, yeah, like, connecting many more people who are much further along and then sort of distributing the insights that are emerging from that frontier, I think is extremely important. The question is, how much are you typing, right? And there's the blog post from this weekend, I think, right? Like, when you choose to engage actually in the software itself, like, I think that's an interesting choice. I'm doing that very little. I had this realization last week. My dot files, which I celebrated the 20th anniversary of that repo last week, or in the summer. It's really been important to me in my career and life. Like, I don't think it really matters at this point because I'm in the shell all the time, yes. But like, the configuration of like, Vim doesn't really matter anymore because I'm just conjuring the state of the code. I'm not typing it. But I am, the question you didn't ask, I am landing a lot of code, a little bit internally and then a lot externally because I'm still trying to figure out what's actually going on. The question I'd like you to ask is how often am I landing code that I didn't write or review? And again, that's something that I'm pushing on a lot in a lot of places, and that's happening more. I have two like open and then closed agentic loops that I'm trying to iterate on GitHub, and it's hard, but I'm increasingly trying to like step back and optimize the process that is producing the software and expect that, it's my job to make sure that it's safe to land when that's true. A lot of like hiccups and stuff, but the count I'm actually thinking about is like how many changes to these code bases are happening that I did not artisanally inspect, if not artisanally type. I am from Portland, so everything is a little bit artisanal. If I came on here and I like explained all the ways that I'm inspecting the binaries that I'm producing, right? You'd be like, "Go away, get off this podcast." Like we'll be in that world. We're not in that world, but like we'll be there. And I think it's important now to try to like just make a binary, like get the compiler to produce the output and run it. And like as intuitive as that is for us in some contexts, like extending that intuition to the actual full software production, I think is like the current problem. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to kick off the raw season. And I'm just glad folks are trying to dig in and think through, talk through what is happening now. And I hope everything on this edition is like totally invalid next week. Brandon, thank you.